George Bernard Shaw said, "You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will." Desire and imagination are relatively free from the limits of the environment, but the creations to which they lead are strongly dependent on the availability of all types of resources. A painter needs a brush and canvas to paint. Diminishing natural resources will eventually mean limited opportunities for creativity to manifest itself, and human imagination remaining enclosed within cranial walls, like a prisoner. Our lifestyle involves consumption of non-renewable resources. There's a number of examples that we can give, but let's take diet, because unlike transport, for instance, it's fundamental to life. Food production and distribution contribute to 25% of greenhouse gas emissions and is therefore a good candidate area for changing behavior. On the one hand, the modern capitalist mode of production and distribution has made it possible for increasingly more people to be fed. On the other hand, however, food production, processing and consumption comprise a long chain of environmentally damaging activities. Clearing land for pastures or agriculture, producing fertilizer and pesticides, plowing, irrigating, packaging, transporting, storage all contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. In Britain, for example, the fossil fuel energy required to produce, process and distribute the average person's annual food intake is about 6 times greater than the energy content of the food. In the Western world, the notion of achievement locks people into dynamic lifestyles, in which the demands of jobs and education make it impossible or difficult to maintain a diet that has little environmental impact. Moreover, capitalism, with its concept of profit maximization, tricks us into consuming a lot more than we need to. Capitalism has taken advantage of the fact that human beings have endless imagination and therefore have more and more desires to satisfy. Capitalism is also one of the factors that stand in the way of governments adopting environmentally sustainable practices because of the need for economic welfare, for which growth is needed. Al Gore's ideal of sustainable capitalism may sound very sensible indeed, but given that current technology can't help us find sustainable energy sources, it won't happen soon. Let's also not forget that the power structure of the world won't allow it. Now, governments focus on economic growth as well as the social problem of the tragedy of the commons mean that the top-down behavioral change strategy that has environmental health at its core just won't work. The environmental externalities that result from food production, processing and distribution are simply not tangible for the individual, and he can't appreciate his own footprint in isolation. Now, the tragedy of the commons tells us that each individual in a given community acts according to his own economic interest. What this means in the context of a behavioral change in relation to food consumption is that each person needs to be convinced in the immediate benefit they personally gain from eating sustainably produced foods. A study by the IFIC in 2009 shows that concerns about environmental impact of food-producing methods are at the lower end. The study has also detected that favorability toward processed foods is lowest among the wealthy and the educated. Now, what implications do these findings have? It means that no matter how much people understand and are touched by stories about greenhouse effects, climate change and land deterioration, emphasizing the environmental impact of our diet simply won't result in a change of a scale that will make a significant difference. Now, why is that? First, the fact that the highest educated have lowest tendency to consume processed foods means that insufficient action is being taken to educate people about the negative health effects of convenience foods and encourage them to switch to healthier alternatives. The better educated presumably also find it easier to bear the cost of organic foods. Second, lower footprint foods are simply more expensive, and the perceived benefit from them is not enough for people to convince them to pay the higher price. Agrochemical agriculture is heavily subsidized by the taxpayer through the government, whereas organic farming receives no subsidies at all. Now this is ludicrous and absolutely inefficient, considering two things. First, the subsidies that have been used to support intensive farming have been promoting for the last 40 years a huge surplus in production that just goes to waste. Second, intensive farming has hidden costs. In the UK, for example, government spends £2.3 billion of taxpayer money every year to clean up the environment. What is it then that can make a difference? The IFIC study mentioned shows that people are twice as much concerned about fat consumption and obesity than they are about the environment. So that means there are three things that need to get done in order to achieve reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from food. First, stop trying to make laymen care about environmental externalities. It is too much for a worker in full-time employment and 2 children and mortgage to pay to also think of what kind of legacy their lifestyle is leaving behind that will play up in 50 or 100 years. Second, get people to understand the link between diet and health. And third, channel subsidies into organic farming. It is a lucky coincidence of biology and physics that healthy food has low environmental impact. And if we can't capitalize on this, then really we have little right to claim supreme intelligence. The Bible tells a story about a people building a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Of them God said that they are one people with one language, and that nothing that they want to do will be stopped. But then God came down and confounded their speech, and those people could no longer understand each other, so they stopped building the city. A painter needs a brush and canvas to paint. These are his resources. Without them, his imagination will be locked in a prison cell. And the key to that prison cell is in our hands, is that change in behavior that has the potential to build a city and a tower for our imagination.